And great. So again, welcome on behalf of All Together to this evening's program. I would like to encourage everyone to keep an eye out for future programs with All Together. We have another virtual program coming up on November the 15th, also at 6:30. That one will focus on the process of restoring rights for formerly incarcerated individuals here in Virginia. So please, if you're on All Together's mailing list, you should get a link for that in the near future. And we look forward to seeing you there. With that, I will turn it over to Thayer Corey to further introduce our speakers tonight. Thayer.
Thank you, Jody. I have to say it's a joy for me to introduce my dear old friend, Wendy Sanford. Wendy and I have known each other for 50, probably a few more than 50 years. And as you know, she's written a book, here it is, called These Walls Between Us, a memoir of friendship across race and class. The book chronicles her evolving friendship with Mary, a Black woman who was, when they met, a domestic worker in Wendy's parents' white and very privileged home. At the time, Mary was 15, I think going on 16, and Wendy was 12. And it gives me equal pleasure to welcome Mary as well. She has joined us this evening. And Mary, it's lovely to see you again, and I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you.
But this is Wendy's story, written from her white perspective, although Mary is, of course, present on every page. At heart, it's a story of transformation and possibility. It's the story of one woman's struggle to confront the brutally overt and subtly covert ways in which the myth of white superiority and the structures of white supremacy have dominated this country's culture, and how they robbed her, and I think I can say us as white people, but how they robbed her of the empathy and understanding that one needs to have if one is going to develop a friendship. So at the beginning of this process, Wendy was, quite frankly, incapable of having a friendship with Mary. Although I always had the sense that both women wanted that relationship to deepen and wanted those connections to be made, it just wasn't possible. So Wendy spent many years examining herself, her family, her family's legacy, really as if under a microscope, peering through the lens of racism. And what she discovered was not pretty, because what she discovered was soul-wrenching and heartbreaking and humbling and sometimes even shameful. But she persisted. And that challenging process of waking up, in addition to Mary's openness and willingness to trust Wendy with her own stories and history and feelings, which is no small feat, by the way, yielded an abiding and deeply loving friendship. And this is where the door of possibility opens. This is where readers can see a different possibility, a new paradigm for how to connect over class and race lines. Three words keep coming to my mind when I think about this book, and they are honesty, courage, and generosity. Wendy's honesty was unflinching as she looked at herself and her history and her family's history, and the courage that both of these women had to have to refuse to be thwarted by the walls that separated them is inspiring. And the generous attention that they've been able to give to each other, always in an expanding circle of love and care, is also inspiring. In my mind, the other thing that makes this book enduringly valuable is that Wendy takes it beyond the strictly personal and weaves in many insights and voices from the emerging fields of Black studies and now whiteness studies. So when you dive into this book, you find yourself in a complex tapestry, a well-woven, I will say, which in my mind means well-written, a complex tapestry of personal history embedded in a broader historic and cultural context. And this, I think, is a significant accomplishment, and one that will endure. And now I'll go on to the part of an introduction that you probably expect to hear right at the beginning, and tell you a little more about Mary and Wendy. Mary worked occasionally and part-time for Wendy's parents for many decades, while she pursued a career in corrections. She was the first female officer in Mercer County, New Jersey correction system, and she rose to the rank of lieutenant before she retired. She tended to both of Wendy's parents in the years and months before their deaths, and then moved back home afterwards to help her own parents during their last decade of life. Wendy and Mary have been creating this friendship for over 60 years. Wendy was one of the founders of the Boston Women's Health Book Collective that wrote Our Bodies, Ourselves. And over the years, she has written for and edited the many revisions of that publication. She's been a chaplain at a commuter college in Boston. She's devoted herself to her writing. She's a Quaker whose faith has shaped and led her life. She's a wife, a mother, and the grandmother of 3, I think, almost grown-up daughters now. So again, Wendy and Mary, thank you for being here. We welcome you and look forward to this conversation tonight. And now I'm going to turn it over to Emily Pease, who is going to be our moderator.
Thank you, Sarah. That is truly one of the best introductions I've heard in a long time. And I can't think of anybody else who could have said it so well. I really appreciate every word you said. I would add only that I got this book a week ago when we were planning this. And so I've immersed myself in this book for the past week. And it's something I would highly recommend people immerse themselves into. It's like reading a novel. It's like reading a really, really riveting story. It's personal. It's so beautifully written. Wendy uses the techniques of fiction to create lives on the page. And I can't say enough about the writing of this book. So I want to start by congratulating you, Wendy, for this amazing accomplishment. And I know it took you 30 years to write this book. So my first question is, what was your first original idea for the book? And why did it take you so long?
Mary will laugh at this one. Mary and I started really becoming friends after she had been coming just about every summer to help my parents out, to work for my parents, to do all the hard work of our summer vacation. And I would come more and more briefly, but as I became an adult. And there was a moment where we were both single parents, both divorced. Mary was, as Sarah said so well, working her way up in the correction system in Mercer County, New Jersey. And I was a feminist health activist. and we started walking on the beach together. And at night, it had to be at night because that beach, very upper class, white controlled beach, Black people were welcome pretty much only if they were serving a white family. So we walked at night, and plus Mary's work was over. We started walking at night, and we started talking more honestly about our lives. And after about 5 years of this, we're out on the beach one night, and Mary, remember that? Mary says, we should write a book about our friendship. No one would believe it. Then you said, it'll make us a lot of money, which now, of course, memoirs don't make much money. So probably we won't get rich. But, and then you said, maybe it'll even get us on Oprah, because Oprah had just started. That was the year that Oprah's show started, so many years ago. And so that was more than 40 years ago that Mary said that to me. And I took it really seriously, and we kind of fell into my writing it for so many reasons, including that Mary worked 3 jobs. And I used to call her workaholic, right, Mary? Knowing so little about your life.
I know, yes.
And it was a novel for a while, and then I realized I'm just not a novelist. Because what memoir does is it allows you to render an original scene or moment as vividly as you can, and then come back and give what you've learned since then. And this book really needed that format. And it took so long because it kept not being right. It just kept needing more work. Either I'd think it was done, and all of a sudden, the whole movement around white privilege came, and I realized how much more the book needed. Then I would think it was done. I just kept thinking it was done, and then someone would make a comment on it that showed that the book focused so much on me. Where was Mary's voice? And then Mary and I talked, and I interviewed her and wrote down everything she ever said. Sometimes she asked me what happened, right? Because I wrote it all down. And then finally, I think the book had to take long enough for texting to come about. Do you want to say, Mary, kind of how texting changed? And that was just in the last 5 years, but kind of what it added to our work together?
Well, it made it easier. You would send me the questions you wanted to know how I felt about it, and I would just text the answers to you. So it just made it a whole lot easier.
It really did. So your voice, oh, sorry, yeah. Go on.
I said, plus lots of times I was really busy during that time with my mother.
Yeah. Exactly. So the texting really came up after your mom died and after your dad died, and we had a little more time. And yeah, the time was a big factor also. Thanks for adding that. And with texting, your voice came into the book much more because it wasn't coming through. It was still coming through my questions, but not through my words. It was your words on the page. And that, I think, so that's why we had to wait 30 years. It took at least 30 years to get to this point. But then, Emily, to finish answering your question, suddenly Mary was 80 and I was 76. And we thought, okay, this book has gone through so many changes. We don't think we have time for another one. So we decided it's not the book we set out to write. It's not our book about our friendship. It's as close as I could get, fully acknowledging that I, as a white person, did most of the actual writing. It was as close as we were going to get in this lifetime. And now it's nice we can just talk. I'm not interviewing you anymore. We're just talking.
So the book is such a story that what I'd like to do is move right into the book itself. The journey that you, Mary, took just is daunting. 15 years old, Elk Creek, Virginia, and you've been called by someone in Nantucket, Massachusetts to come and work in the summer. And so you have to take a train with a bologna sandwich. You travel and eventually stay with an aunt. You ride in a police car. Somehow there's a policeman who takes you to the ferry dock, and then you get on a ferry. First time ever on a ferry. You've got your suitcase. Inside your suitcase is a radio and some orange soda. And you're going off. You could have been going to the moon. And you're entering Mary's family's life. And that's the beginning. The first chapter, I love the title. The first chapter is called White People Swimming, which is actually very funny to me. It comes from Wendy, you had asked some young boy who had worked in the summer in Nantucket what he thought of his experience. And he said, oh, it's just white people swimming, which I just thought there's something so wonderfully sarcastic about that. I'm wondering, Wendy, if you could read a short passage from that first chapter to set the tone.
Sure. I will just say that I should have, this is a revision that's needed in the book. So my mother was good friends, was not good friends with, friends is a tricky word, but she knew a young police officer in the town and where they were friendly with each other. And she thought the ideal way for Mary to get from New Jersey, from her aunt's state up to Nantucket, was for this very reliable police officer to drive her. But it was in his own car, I think, wasn't it, Mary? He wasn't a police car, was it? Yeah. Go on.
It was his own car.
Yeah. And my mother had no idea that police in rural Virginia were white and enforced a lot of terrible practices. Whether or not Mary had had those experiences, my mother might have known that. So Mary has to get in the car with a police officer and drive for 6-8 hours. And you said he didn't say much.
About 3 words.
And then you ended up being really good friends as the years went on and on.
We did. We really did. Yes.
Yeah.
Norm was a great guy.
Yeah, Norm was. Okay, so that's it. I just wanted to clear that up, the police car part. So this is just the very first, just after Mary's gotten there. My mother began teaching Mary how my father liked his coffee, his pork chops, his steak. She taught Mary to fill the ice bucket from 11 a.m. forward to make sure the liquor cabinet always had enough booze. Mary fixed the squeak and slam of the kitchen door. She set the ironing board permanently in her room, where she pulled the green shades down over nearly shut windows. My mother had instructed Mary to dress for duty from breakfast through dinner, except for 2 hours each afternoon and Thursdays and Sundays after lunch. During her time off, Mary often did the ironing. Occasionally, she sat on the edge of her bed to read, sipping from a single orange soda poured over ice. My mother was delighted to find that Mary was a reader. A loan of a thick hardback with a tall stone castle and a flowing-haired white maiden on the cover soon waited on the bedside table beside Mary's radio. I wasn't allowed to read those love books at home, Mary remembers. With my grandmother, I'd have to hide in the bed with a flashlight under the covers reading True Confessions magazines. In Nantucket, as soon as your mother finished one of her books, she gave it to me. Learning all of that made me feel grown up. I didn't bother her by wanting to go anywhere on my day off. I just wanted to be in my room reading. It worked for both of us.
You know, you get such a, you convey this house, this small Nantucket house so beautifully, and Mary's room and the sitting room and the kitchen and there's the ocean outside. It's so vivid. In a later passage, you describe Mary's role as being as being invisible. One of the requirements of the domestic worker's job is just to do the job as invisibly as possible. There's this quote, "My parents valued Mary's invisibility, her gift for doing her work without drawing notice to herself. They would have said that they saw her as a human being, but they wanted her like furniture, to be invisible." So I wonder if you could talk about this whole idea of invisibility and what was the role of a domestic worker in a house like that?
Shall I start, Mary, or do you want to?
No,
the writer who really helped me understand some of the unspoken words of rules of domestic service was Judith Rollins, who is a sociologist who's now emerita from Wellesley. And I quote her a bunch in the book because she actually, in her research, she posed as a domestic worker. She's African-American. She posed as a domestic worker. I think it was in the 60s or 70s or something like that, in white families in Boston area. And plus she interviewed a lot of white employers and a lot of African-American employees. And it's just a fascinating book. It's called Between Women, White Employers and Black Domestic Workers, or something like that. It's a more interesting title than I'm remembering. So the women, she discovered herself, for instance, she was in the kitchen doing her work, and the family was all in the kitchen and having this big argument, but just as though she weren't there. And she realized she really was invisible as a Black person in this white household. So that's, she pointed that out. What were some of the other rules? Oh, that African-American workers domestic workers had to stand up. You weren't supposed to sit down in the presence of your employer. You had to call them by their formal name. They called you by your first name. There were just a whole bunch of rules that, do you want to add any of that, or how did you become aware of those rules?
Well, I sort of knew that when I got there the first time, Wendy, because I had worked in homes before in Virginia, and that was the rule, more or less. You went, you did the work, and you left. So it was no interaction at all, other than instructions on how to do something.
Yes, I remember once when I said to you, why do you think we became friends? And you said, well, except for your mother giving me instructions, which, you're the only person who really talked to me. So that's how we became friends, is I was the only person to talk to. And then we took it further than that, but.
Yes.
Yeah.
So this wasn't in our playlist, but listening to this, I'm wondering, Mary, do you remember, of course you do, your feelings of arriving in Nantucket to such a foreign place?
I was scared and very, very nervous. I didn't know anything. I couldn't boil water, actually. So, I always say that. So, and I think back on those days, it was just so long ago, and the memories, some of them. But Wendy's mother was very, very patient with me, and instructed me on how she wanted things done. So that's how I made out. She was always very nice.
And you were on the ocean, which is a long way from Elk Creek.
Yes. Had never seen the ocean before.
And as far as white people swimming wasn't your thing.
No. And I still don't know how to swim to this day. And but there was a lot of other things that happened that it was, in a sense, educational for me too.
Can you give an example?
Well, with the reading, just with the books and doing a lot of reading opened up another world for me. Actually learning how to cook and how to serve and what wine goes with what dish, you know. So I learned all of those things. How to make drinks. I never, because I didn't have that in my home. So it was just a lot of different things.
Yeah.
And you did so well at learning it that my mother begged you to come back summer after summer after summer.
True. That is true. She did. And it was just so hard to turn her down.
So I want to go back to Wendy to your original title of the book was Walking the Beach at Nightfall. And we can tell already that those walks on the beach meant so much and were so stimulating and gave you so many ideas. But eventually you came up with this title, These Walls Between Us. Where did that final title come from? And could you share with us a little story behind that?
Oh, sure. I'd love to. So, yeah, Walking the Beach at Nightfall was a title that Mary and I both liked because we knew what it meant to us. And we knew why we had to walk after night, after dark. But someone just seeing it in a bookstore would think it was a summer beach read. So I was informed by some people who advised me well that the title needed to change. And this title actually I was praying on it and the title came, and I'm so grateful for that. And it refers to a scene, at least it refers to many things, but there are kind of the scene in the book that I think you're talking about. It was my wedding summer. My mother had prevailed on Mary to come help, even though it meant leaving her children behind or her child behind. I came home from doing some errands in town, and the beach cottage had all the windows open because it was a hot day. And as I walked past the back end to the back entrance of the kitchen entrance, in the dining room, I heard my mother talking, and I peeked in, and she was having lunch. She was having a little lunch that Mary had made for her, I was sure, little cucumber sandwiches with the edges cut off, the crust cut off. And then I heard Mary talking through the window, through the window to the kitchen. I heard Mary talking, and it didn't sound quite the way it always did of just my mother giving Mary instructions, but they were actually chatting. And I realized that they were having lunch together, but my mother was in the dining room with her back to the wall that also went into the kitchen. And Mary had her back to the same wall in the kitchen, and they were having lunch together. And so that said, look, at the time, I just noticed it. But coming back to it after years and years of learning what I could about race and class and the rules of domestic service, and I understood that these two women, there were so many barriers to their really talking. And that wall was a symbol. It was actual and it was symbolic at the same time. And then I thought of all the walls between me and Mary as we have co-created our friendship over decades. Does that answer your question okay?
Yeah, that's great. So that was in the chapter called Dream Wedding, which is kind of a pivotal chapter. You were engaged to a very acceptable young man, and you were going to have a very fancy wedding in Nantucket. But the titling it Dream Wedding is a play on the word dream from Ta-Nehisi Coates's book, Between the Walls and Me. Sorry, Between the World and Me. I've got walls in my mind. Mm-hmm. And this is a little quote from him. The dream is Memorial Day cookouts, block associations, and driveways. The dream is tree houses and Cub Scouts. And it was that dream that was it ended up being almost a violent barrier for Ta-Nehisi Coates in his Baltimore childhood. But you had a dream wedding, but there's a little cloud over the memories of your dream wedding. Could you talk about what that was about?
Oh, Mary, this is a hard part to talk about. So I always, in my memory, Mary came to my wedding. Literally, I pictured where she sat in the church. I even pictured where she sat at the reception, what color dress she was wearing. And many, many years later, we talked about this, and she said, I wasn't there. You didn't invite me. And that my mother and I begged Mary to come help out. My mother said she couldn't do a wedding without Mary, even whatever Mary had to give up to be there. There were like 300 invitations. And I didn't think to invite Mary to the wedding. I feel grief about that still. So that's the underside of that dream wedding, and plays into everything Ta-Nehisi Coates is saying about that dream. It's such an exclusively white dream, or middle class, upper middle class dream. I don't have more to say about that. Mary, do you want to? She thought I remembered, and I didn't. Do you want to say anything about that, Mary?
Yeah, well, I really thought you had remembered that I wasn't there, because when the limousine came and picked you up, it was such a rush there with all the little teeny tiny buttons on that dress.
Which you did, so my mother wouldn't ruin her manicure.
I know. But I really hadn't expected to go anyway, so it wasn't, we had not carried our friendship to that point at that time, so it didn't bother me that you didn't invite me. But
this is it possible, Wendy, that somewhere in the back of your mind you thought, well, Mary might feel left out, she might feel out of place?
To be perfectly honest, I don't think I thought about it. It's very possible, Mary, that you would have had a pretty unpleasant time with all these white people drinking, which they did a bunch of at the reception. But I really think that as we became closer and closer friends, my imagination went in there and created what I wanted to remember.
That leads me to talk about Eggshells. In your epigraph, this book, and for those of you who don't remember, epigraph is like an epitaph. It sits at the top of a book or the top of a poem. So this is one of the epigraphs in the book. It says, "If you walk on eggshells, I won't be able to talk to you the way I do." And there's something that Mary said to you. walking on the eggshells, not being able to talk openly. And this whole book is about the process of coming to know one another when you're not walking on eggshells. It's the story of you, Wendy, slowly opening your eyes and not walking on the eggshells. Can you talk a little bit about that problem and maybe even recall when Mary said that to you? When you walk on eggshells, I won't be able to talk to you the way I do.
Mm-hmm. I remember it so well. And Mary, I'll ask you if you want to add anything. So I was partly as a feminist, and I was in seminary at the time. I was just reading everything I could get my hands on by African-American women in particular. And I read this amazing memoir, autobiography by Anne Moody called Coming of Age in Mississippi. And I brought it to Nantucket that summer, and I gave it to Mary and said, see what you think of this book. And she read it in one night. And the next morning, I said, what did you think? And she said, Wendy, that book was my life. And in that moment, I understood what I didn't know, all that I didn't know about this person I really liked. And then the next year, I'd been doing a whole bunch of reading about how progressive white people, kind of anti-racist white people, had for a while been trying to be colorblind because they thought race, noticing racial differences had been used so cruelly in the early Jim Crow years, et cetera. So progressive people thought, we'll be colorblind, that's better. And then the next round of progressive thinkers thought, oh, colorblind is terrible because that means you're not noticing that color really does matter in this country, that people are treated differently by their race. So then I was trying to become more race aware, which was the new thing I was really trying to do. So I remember talking with Mary, I was standing outside your door, and I asked you some question about the other officers at the prison. I said, I wanted to say, do you work with other Black people? I had never used the word Black with Mary in 20 years of knowing each other. Maybe not even African-American, but so I chronicle in the book, in a whole paragraph, what my mouth felt like saying the word Black to Mary for the first time. And I was so stumbling and so self-conscious. And that's when Mary said, if you walk on eggshells with me, Wendy, I won't be able to talk with you the way that I do. And that just frightened me into changing my act, because I really loved how we spoke with each other, and I really valued her as a friend. And I was trying to do this better thing by acknowledging race, but I was so tentative and careful. I was just too careful. And that Mary's message to me, I think Mary to me, was don't be so careful or we can't be friends. What would you add, Mary, to that moment?
Well, that was true. You were stumbling over trying to ask me the question, and you had gotten all pink, and I was like, my goodness, just ask me So that's why I said it's like, if you can't ask me something because you're so afraid of my feelings, then how would you ever know anything about me or what I'm doing? So that's why I said that to you.
Yeah.
So Wendy, you were referencing walking on the beach and talking with Mary about her corrections work. And Mary, you started as an officer and worked your way up. So you were somebody in charge, but you still struggled.
She started as a guard, actually, and then went to officer training school, right?
Yes.
And And you eventually were somebody who was in charge and giving orders, but you didn't get the respect you deserved. And as wardens would change, wardens can make all the difference, and they didn't allow you to have the responsibility that you deserved, and so you struggled with that. So the two of you are walking on the beach, and Wendy wants to talk to you about this. And there you have this wonderful passage, Wendy, of walking on the beach and talking to Mary about this. It's a great example of your examination of microaggressions. I think this, Wendy, is...
okay, I found it.
Got
Good.
it? Okay.
Thank you.
So if you would read that to us, that would be great.
Good. So this was shortly after Mary first went to officer training school and became a sergeant. She wasn't, and she was being harassed by her fellow officers, not by wardens. That came later. The warden from hell came later. So we're on the beach. Oh, actually, this was our first beach walk. Linking arms in the darkness, we threaded our way across the sand through the sharp dune grass over crackly piles of dried seaweed. You okay? I asked once or twice. I could just see Mary's nod. Where the open beach flattened out before beginning to slant towards the water, we let go and stood for a moment looking up at stars that wheeled far above our heads. Sit or walk? I asked. Let's walk, she said. Under cover of darkness, we began a walk that daytime would not permit. A Black domestic worker strolling in a relaxed manner on the secluded whites-only beach. Mary pulled a Salem from her pocket and turned her back to the breeze to light it. On a smoky exhalation, she began to speak about her fellow corrections officers. These men never had a woman superior to them in rank before, so they liked to make things difficult. Recently, her fellow officers had, quote, forgotten to tell her about a certain set of keys that the night supervisor was supposed to carry, keys that would have made her job easier and safer. And they do not like having a woman in their locker room, she added. Just that week, guards had plastered photos of naked women on the walls of the locker room they had been ordered to share with Mary. Girly photos, she said. Ones no decent woman should have to set eyes on. I thought of a manuscript I was editing for the Alliance Against Sexual Coercion. Mary seemed to be encountering classic workplace harassment. By refusing to advise or assist Mary in her work as a night supervisor, her fellow guards were undermining her success on the job. By withholding information about the night supervisor's keys, they were putting her in danger. Although the men did not threaten Mary directly with sexual violence, lewd pictures in the locker room were a menacing message of disrespect. All their tactics seemed aimed at unsettling and unnerving Mary. I thought she'd start to cry any minute. Mary took an emphatic tug on her cigarette. I fixed them, she said, not crying at all. You know that magazine that started having centerfolds of naked men? I cut out a big naked He-Man and taped him up inside my locker door. Then I opened my locker and exclaimed, now there's my idea of a real man. She snorted into the night. They stopped that funny business, I'll tell you. They've realized, and then a little later, she said, they realized I'm not going away, she said. Some of the guys I supervise have even found out I'll go to bat for them with the warden. A few started coming around to my office for coffee. And the ones who still don't accept you, I asked? I just have to keep an eye out for what they'll try next. What? Are you thinking about that centerfold? Am I awful? The guards are the awful ones, I said. Suddenly, I was on a mission to tell Mary everything I'd learned from my new editing job. The guards were harassing her, I said, and poisoning her work environment. They were illegally affecting her working conditions. The warden should protect her. Mary could take the county to court under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 or the Occupational Health and Safety Act of 1970. Mary walked steadily ahead during my outburst. This is all in a book I've been editing, I said finally. Do you want to see the manuscript? Mary didn't jump at the offer. Sure, if you like. You don't want to see it? I asked. I'm sure the book will be helpful. It's just that I've handled them already, she said. But your body is like a fortress. I said, your back is all seized up. I said this almost accusingly, as if Mary's tense and defended back were somehow her doing. I was concerned for her well-being, yes, but today when I listen again, like a fortress, all seized up, there's a note of complaint or even accusation in what I said to Mary, as though I resented the discomfort of worrying about her. Subtle, perhaps, but I see it as no coincidence that shortly afterwards, Mary turned around to head back along the beach.
So that's it. That really, it goes in so many directions. It's we think it's so funny that Mary, you put this photograph in your locker and you showed them, and yet then we see Wendy all full of herself with all of her studies, and she wants to tell you all about it. And it's like what Barbara Hamley said in her interview with you a few weeks ago on WHRV with her program, Another View. Sometimes it's like a roller coaster reading your book, because you feel this one thing and then you feel another. There's a triumph and then there's a real failure. There are these recognitions along the way of how you've blown it, of how you didn't get it. I love the way you say, when I think about this conversation later, which was years later, so these conversations are embedded in your memory. Going back to them, you just kind of do this, oh, what did I say? What did I do? The slow unfolding is like the scales fall from your eyes, using a biblical expression. And this happens over and over again in your book. I felt like your description of microaggressions was one of the best I've read. And they were the ones that you had committed, these little moments of, I know what you really feel kind of thing that happened in this book. And I think it's one of the real triumphs of the book.
Do we have time for me to mention one more microaggression?
Absolutely. Microaggression away.
This one really, I felt bad about. I still do, actually. I guess that's why I want to talk about it. But at one point, one summer, Mary and I we always looked forward to the night that would come clear. For my parents would be out, we'd walk together. And at the end of a walk, that particular summer, I said, Mom, my mother is just really upset with me. She keeps wanting to see my friends. And then I heard what I just said. My mother meant my white friends, but I didn't say my white friends. I said she wants me to see my friends. And then I realized immediately that I'd implied that Mary wasn't my friend. And so that, I feel, that's what I think of as a microaggression. I said something thoughtlessly that could have landed really hurtfully. Do you remember that, Mary? Do you want to say anything about that moment? She was always more forgiving of me than I was, really, but.
No, Wendy, it's just you didn't quite have the understanding yet of things or the way things were, and lots of times, and actually they're still that way right now. So that's all I could say about that one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's a painful memory.
So that makes me want to jump ahead to one of the last chapters, talking about what you didn't understand, and that slow, it's like your education, again, scales falling from your eyes. So you, this is later, your parents have passed away, and you go to visit Mary at her home in Trenton, New Jersey, and spend a couple days there. And on the last day, you're sitting in the living room, and there's the bookshelf, and Mary pulls down a book. It's a book by Alice Childress called Like One of the Family, Conversations from a Domestic's Life. And it was published in 1956, which is the same year, Mary, that you took that long trip to Nantucket at the age of 15. And it's a novel. And so you pull the book down and you begin to read passages to Wendy. And it's like the book is meant to be there as a kind of conversation and education for Wendy. Wendy, would you mind reading just from that passage where the two of you are sharing this book that it really comes out and is upfront about the domestic life in a white family, the Black.
Right. The domestic worker, Mildred, has a sharp tongue and really tells the truth. And this is a book I had given to Mary 20 years earlier. And we'd, because I thought we'd both enjoy reading it and get something out of Mildred's sassiness. But so Mary started reading from the book to me. And she says, Mrs. C, you're a pretty nice person to work for, but I wish you'd please stop talking about me like I was a Cocker Spaniel or a Paul Parrot or a kitten. At this, Mary held the book out in the air as though it might ignite her slacks or the sofa. Should I go on? She asked. Do you want to? I said. Do you? She asked. With Mildred's help, Mary and I were entering new territory. Sassy, confrontational, and truth-telling in ways that might get a real-time domestic worker fired, the Mildred character vented truths that Mary had never spoken to me. In what looked at the time like a dance of permission, Mary was asking if I could handle these truths. Definitely, if you do, I said. Mary read on. In the first place, says Mildred, you do not love me. She's speaking to her employer, who in fact is a Mrs. C, which is what Mary called my mother too, Mrs. C. In the first place, you do not love me. You may be fond of me, but that is all. In the second place, I am not just like one of the family at all. The family eats in the dining room and I eat in the kitchen. Mildred can say that again, I said, grabbing at the chance to be good. Remember you and Mom in Nantucket eating your lunch back to back with a kitchen wall between you? Mary paused. Now that you say it, I do, she said. But before I could enjoy joining her in the summer kitchen with the boss on the other side of the wall, she continued with Mildred's emphatic next words. Now for another thing, I do not just adore your little Carol. Mary loves us, my mother had always said, and we love her. I opened my mouth, but Mary went on reading. You think it's a compliment when you say we don't think of her as a servant, but after I have worked myself into a sweat, cleaning the bathroom and the kitchen, Mary gave a little snort here and began a dramatic rendering of each task on Mildred's list. Making the beds, cooking the lunch, washing the dishes, and ironing Carol's pinafores. I do not feel like no weekend house guest. I feel like a servant. And in the face of that, I've been meaning to ask you for a slight raise. Smiling broadly now, Mary flipped to the front of the book and ran her finger down the list of chapter titles like she meant to read more soon. Like one of the family, my mother had always said. Wrong, I thought. Wrong, wrong.
That is not the last chapter of the book, but for me, your reader, it might have been the one that really hit me the hardest. That's just an amazing chapter there. So last question. How do you hope people will use this book? I asked this to Wendy, and then I have a question for Mary. For Wendy, how do you hope people will use this book?
Well, Mary and I have talked about this a lot, and number one, I'm hoping that African-American people who read the book will find that it's accurate and trustworthy. There's nothing I'm teaching anyone who's Black in this country about any of these dynamics that I had to learn about. So I hope they'll find it authentic and honest and accurate. I'm hoping white people will read. I'm so happy you think it's like a story, it's well written, because I'm hoping people will be carried along by the scenes and learn with me a bit, things that maybe they aren't aware of that are getting in the way of interracial friendships they prize and want to be part of, and may not be showing up for with the kind of information and awareness that needs to be there. So I just hope that white people will use it. Mary, and then Mary, you said a wonderful thing about the Trump era. Do you want to say that about, because that's another hope we have for the book?
Yes, with the when he first came on and started campaigning, I saw what he was, and it was frightening to me, and with him having become president and seeing what has happened since while he was president, and what happened January 6th. I was watching television when, you know, how they break in because someone is speaking, and he was speaking there. And right then I realized what was happening, that I was like, this is like a Hitler thing. And because I had saw that documentary on Hitler and how he came to power, and Trump, as far as I'm concerned, he did it step by step by step the same way. And he wanted to destroy the United States as we have sort of become used to. So
I remember you're saying about the book, you said when Trump first was running, his people all said, let's make America great again. And you said this book will show people what America was really like back then.
It was like in 1956 or 57 when I first came. That's what he wanted to happen. It's very sad because I thought that we were sort of getting past that. And with domestics, which there is still a lot of Black domestics working today, they are invisible in a sense, and I think that the people that employs them, they're only interested in the fact that they come, do the work, and leave. I don't think they have any caring as to what they're going through or their struggles. And that is sad. And some employees really like the person, but if they can only like them to a certain extent. And that's what I've seen and noticed.
Yeah. You and I were talking just last week about a new law in New York State that guarantees the rights of domestic workers to things like sick leave. There's a group called the National Domestic Workers Alliance, and that some of those changes are just starting to happen, and we really celebrated that.
Yes, that was good because I told you, and you said, oh, Mary, I didn't know that happened, that with my youngest, I went to the hospital. I think he was born at 7:15 at night, p.m. And the next morning, 9 o'clock, I got in my car and drove home and got a sitter and went shopping for baby milk and things that I needed for him. And then the next day I went to work. So,
Exactly.
had there been sick time or something to have helped me out during that period of time where I could have recuperated, but there wasn't. So you do what you have to do to survive.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you for these great this hour that we've had of talking about this book, and you're sharing your experiences. And I think we have time for questions from people who are here. You can either flap your hand, or if you want to use the reactions button at the bottom and click it and have that little golden hand come up. Either way, it'd be great to hear some questions from anybody among us. Any comments? Anything anything that stimulated you to have something to say?
Emily, it looks like Jessica has her hand raised.
Okay, thank you.
Me unmute. Well, I mean, this is just so completely reminiscent of my own childhood with my own Black maid, and how over the years things occurred to me when you're growing up, you think that's the way things are. And then when you start reflecting on them, you know, we always had a live-in maid, and she lived in a tiny little space off the kitchen. I was just horror struck when I realized it, you know, and I have real regrets that I've never been able to get in touch with one of the people that took care of me, who wasn't that much older than I was, because I don't even know her last name, and I don't have any way to find out. And it's very interesting to hear what you have to say. And Mary, hopefully we're all becoming a little bit more aware, and hopefully we're not treating people the same way. Talking for myself and other people, it's just it just brings it all back. So thank you.
Thank you, Jessica.
Mary Jane Foley also has her hand raised.
I just wanted to thank both of you for coming, and Mary especially, because I think sometimes you must feel, maybe, I don't know if you feel put on the spot or whatever, but I think it's just brave of you to participate in all this. I think what is just astounding to me, and it's always been astounding to me ever since I was young, is how cruel people can be towards other people, and not even be aware of it. And I'm as guilty as anybody. When I think of all the prejudices that existed back when I was young, like making fun of not just Black people. I grew up in a community that had I didn't meet my first Black person until I was in high school, I think, being in Massachusetts. But just, we used to say, no good Indian, but there's no good Indian but a dead Indian. Does anybody remember saying that when they were a kid? And just I didn't make fun of Polish people, but I mean, people, you know, it's just how people put people down back then, and everybody, and the need to do that. And I just feel so grateful that people are becoming more aware of those kinds of things. in all sorts of realms. But I just wanted to be thankful too. I mean, so that's what I wanted to say.
Thank you, MJ. I wanted to say that you were talking about Mary's courage in showing up today. And in addition to showing up at the age 15, traveling across half the country. So this is an experiment. This is an adventure for us. This is the first time Mary has joined. We've done this together. And we'll be talking afterwards about how it went and whether she'll want to continue. Because I've been on, a few shows because the book just came out, and it's just wonderful to do it together. But also takes, you said it so well, MJ, I don't need to repeat it.
Connie, would you like to ask your question or make your comment? You're on mute, Connie.
Okay, sorry. I wanted to thank both of you. I always find it amazing listening to other people's experiences, especially as far as race, because I'm a military dependent. So every place I've ever lived, people looked a lot different than me. So we were sort of forced to get along, and we also identified more as American when we were overseas than anything else. But I have to admit, coming back to the States, in Montgomery, Alabama in 1959, I got a really good dose of what the American view and perspective was. So I think that, Mary, you are exceptionally brave. And I think that one of the people that we know very well says that, you do what you have to do, not what you want to do. And that's something that carries through in our culture. But this story is so interesting, and I'm wondering, how do you find a moment, a teaching moment? Because the children that we're raising, the people that are coming behind us, this is really important, that you can have a friend that you can walk on the beach with, even if it's at night, but that you can walk on the beach with and be okay and not see color. And also to teach them about implicit bias and the fact that you can't do the eggshells. Mary is absolutely right. You cannot have a conversation if you're afraid to talk about race. So how do we do that? How do we teach the people that we need to about that?
Mary, do you have thoughts on that? And I might just ask Connie, it sounds like you have some thoughts on it too. It's so important.
I just think people just need to talk to each other. And then I think they would find that their world isn't so different, that they have a lot of the same issues of, like, I can't sleep. I don't know what to cook for dinner. It's just all of these things, or just, you have that, Wendy. We talk about it a lot. You'll say, oh, I don't know what I'm going to make for dinner. And I'll be, well, I don't know. I want to make the dish that you remember that you made once when you came to Virginia. So it's if people could just do that, they'll find that, gosh, the only difference is our skin.
Mm-hmm. I actually do have thoughts about it, Wendy. I have very good friends that are not African-American that I've been told that they would take a bullet for me. So that must mean that they must love me a lot. But one of them, she was from Beaver Creek, Ohio. She saw her first Black person, I think, in high school. And she said to me, when we became friends, and even though we had been friends for 20 years, she went to Germany and she was going to buy me a gift. And she looked at some angels, a Yadro, and she said, I couldn't figure out whether or not to get you a regular one or to get you a Black one. And I said, regular to me is Black. My angels that I see are Black. My Santa that I see is Black. So she said, you know, I didn't mean to hurt. I didn't mean to say anything wrong. And I said, no, but if you don't know, you don't know. So we just have to find opportunities to help people learn. That's all. And to talk, just like Mary said, just to be very open, very honest, and to have a conversation.
Thank you, Jessica. And Connie, excuse me. Thank you, Connie. Jessica was the person who spoke first. I would also say, in addition to talking, I would say read. That's what I just started reading, everything I could get my hands on, so that Mary didn't have to teach me everything, so that I was learning from people who had already written so beautifully about so many things and their experience as African Americans in this country, so that we don't have to go to our friends who are different to teach us everything. So reading and talking and listening.
Thank you, Cheryl.
I want to say thank you also to both of you. This has been a fascinating conversation, and I, like others, are amazed at Mary. And one of my biggest amazements is that you went so far at the age of 15 for a summer job. I wouldn't go out of the neighborhood, I think, but that was just amazing. We had once a week domestic workers, and I might have seen Ethel or Willie when they came in the morning, and then I left for school and they were gone by the time I got home from school. So really had not much interaction with them once a week. One of the things in the house I grew up in, it was a early 1930s house, and brick in a nice neighborhood. And everything was really done nicely, tiles and bathroom and kitchen and so on. But there was a bathroom in the basement that was just boards, just painted on the walls, rough boards. And I never much liked, well, none of us, there were 4 kids, none of us or my friends much liked going in there. And I never, ever could figure out why it was like that until I saw the movie The Help. And I pray, I'm pretty sure that my mother would not have required that Ethel or Willie or whoever would use that bathroom exclusively. And I pray she didn't, but I don't think she would have. But it was so puzzling to us growing up, had no idea. Quick change of subject.
Excuse me, I just want to see, did you want to say something to that part first?
No, not really, but that probably was what it was for. I mean, I don't want to hurt her feelings.
I don't know, but, not a bit. I think that's probably what it was for too.
It was as, that was the time. That's what you have to say. That was the time, that's all.
And if my parents knew that that's what it was, they didn't enlighten us. It was just the way it was. You know, it was
exactly.
So I don't really know, like I said, how my mother treated we called them maids at the time, our maids, regarding toilet facilities. But my guess is that's what it was built for when the house was built, which I found appalling. But one last comment for Wendy, and that is, I probably bought one of the first editions of Our Bodies Ourselves. And I remember I was in college and giving it to my sisters, who were twins and 3 years younger, for birthday presents. And they were just such a feminist. You know, and I think my mother was even a bit appalled, but I loved it.
That's fabulous.
So, thank you both.
Well, it's 7:48. Do we have any other comments or questions? Thayer.
I'm just sitting here thinking, and it's something I think about a lot. We say we need to talk to each other, and we absolutely do. I think of myself as somebody who has known about race all my life and had a great deal of feelings about it, because we did have a domestic worker in our household who took care of my brother and me, my twin brother and I, my twin brother and me, from the time we were like 6 months old. And yet I am always astonished in myself. Here I am thinking that I have known a lot about race, and I'm very sensitive, and I'm very compassionate, and so on and so forth. And I'm always so surprised when I bump up against my own blind spots and my own gaps. And I mean, Wendy, I would have been right there with you on the beach telling Mary exactly what she needed to do about the guy in the prison. Like, I've read books about that. I'm at it, yeah, here's the deal. Here's what you need to know. And completely missed the fact that Mary knew probably more than this person writing the book that you were editing. And you were at that time in your life, as I said in my introduction, incapable of having a friendship with Mary. You had so many blind spots, and we're like all of us, and we're so oblivious, like all of us white people. And I think we say, yes, we need to talk to each other, but I think it is incumbent on white people to really, really work hard on this. And as you said, not to expect Black people to educate us, but to, as you did, kind of examine our own selves like under a microscope, these little moments, these little mini things or reactions. I sometimes find myself sort of having a reaction to something and thinking, oh my God, that's, I'm making a lot of assumptions here about this person or about this situation. Mm-hmm. So white people have work to do, and it is not easy work because this society is so steeped in the myth of white superiority and the structures and institutions of white supremacy. It's not an easy ride to get below that and see beyond it. That's all I wanted to add.
Elizabeth Crome has a question or a comment.
Yeah, I would love to hear from Mary about a mental process I find myself in sometimes that I think just tangles me up, which is being aware of not wanting to ask my Black friends to do the labor of educating me. And I have been reading all I can get my hands on for some time to educate myself, to try to do that work. But there are times when I want to say, and I'm thinking really specifically right now of a specific friend I have, when I want to say, Justin, how did that hit you? And I don't want him to do the emotional work of educating me. And yet I want to know if he and I are seeing things. We serve on a committee together, a Quaker committee. And I want to know if something that hit me in a particular way hit him in that same way. And so I'm really, I think I'm walking on eggshells. But do you have any wise words for how to thread my way through wanting to do my work and yet having questions that I can only guess how Justin feels about this unless I ask him?
Well, I think that you should ask him because that is the only way that you're going to know for sure. And if you consider him a friend, or is it just a person that serves on the committee or whatever? No, it's a friend. Well, it's a friend. You should just ask him. And I think he probably would appreciate you asking whatever, so that you would have the full understanding of it. And you would just become better friends, actually, I think.
I agree with Mary. And also you won't run the risk of overgeneralizing, because the only way to find out is to ask. And especially if it's a friend, the friend is going to help you. And it's not work for them. It's the friendship, the investment that they make in the friendship.
Thank you.
I understand Kathy Roach has had a hand up for a while, and I apologize if anyone's been waving at their screen. I can't see everybody's videos the way my screen is set up. So Kathy, would you like to unmute yourself?
Okay. Yes, the last comments really helped me because I'm trying to bridge the gap about being direct with a new Black friend that I have. And I met this friend while I was swimming at the rec center, and she told me that she's been swimming for several years. I'm the first person to ever talk to her. So as soon as I knew her name, I'm kind of extroverted, so I knew everybody else that swims at regular hours, and so I introduced all of them together. So I maintained a friendship with her, and I consider her a friend, but I've never approached sensitive subjects about race with her. But I need that encouragement to go ahead and start talking to her about it. Thank you. Were you able to hear me? Or
yes.
No? Okay. Okay.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So Jody, if we don't have any more questions now, we probably need to wrap this up. But
yes, I don't see any more questions. If anyone is out there wanting to ask something and I'm just not seeing you, feel free to unmute yourself and chime in, or put something in the chat quickly just to let me know that you're there.
There are two things in the chat, one from Beth and one from Connie.
Yes, and Beth is the president of All Together, and thanks everyone for coming this evening, and I will echo that as we wrap up. And then Connie also thanks you for the meeting, and would like to hear more from Wendy and Mary, and we'll try to invite you to to another meeting to talk about the book. So I would like to say also on behalf of All Together, thank you so much to everyone for attending, and thank you to Emily for moderating, and of course, most of all, thank you so much to Wendy and to Mary for coming and sharing this really powerful story with all of us. I think you can tell from the conversation and the comments at the end how much this has touched people. And it's such a wonderful expression of the mission of All Together, which is to bring people together across racial, ethnic, and cultural lines to communicate and to engage in activities that foster unity. And this has been such a wonderful way to model that for us. So thank you. I hope this has been a good experience for both of you. I hope it isn't the last time that you appear together to talk about your story. And I hope that we've made that a good experience for you too. So again, I'll just remind everyone to please keep an eye on All Together's upcoming events. You can go to our website, alltogetherwilliamsburg.org. Sign up for the November 15th event about the restoration of rights and some other events that we have coming up later in the year. And other than that, just again, thank you all.
I just want to add, Jody, that the book has been ordered by the Williamsburg Regional Library. And I'm not sure when it will come in, but it has been ordered, so it will be there.
Yes, and I believe I'm the first in the queue because I'm down on the order form as being number 1. So as soon as I'm done with it, I'm happy to pass it on to the next person.
And the Kindle copy is very inexpensive if you use Kindle.
Thank you, Jessica, for mentioning that. They did a special for $1.99 on the Kindle. And it was supposed to end a couple of days ago, but Amazon is famous for letting these things go on and not noticing. So that's a good opportunity if you can bear to support Amazon.
I just bought it, so no problem.
I want to add that if you decide to buy the book, a portion of the proceeds from the book will go to the Equal Justice Initiative in Montgomery, Alabama.
Okay, great. Okay. Good. Okay. I gotta go.
Well, thank you all again very much, and have a good evening. Stay safe, be well, and thanks again for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mary.
Thank you, Emily and Fair and Jody and everybody. And
Mary.
Thank you.